The playoffs roll on after Watkins Glen, your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, returns. This is the Money Stop, presented by Kickin the Tires and GridRival. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. And we got a spoiler, round one, Cole. Chris Buescher into victory lane for the first time this year. Can't believe it's taken this long, but a guy that we briefly mentioned as one that's been so consistent on road courses, and he ends up winning the whole damn thing. SVG finishes runner-up, and what a race it was at Watkins Glen. A lot of trouble for a lot of playoff drivers.
Yeah, I mean, lap one, you saw so many guys in the playoffs get cleaned out, namely Denny, Hamlin, Ryan Blaney as two heavy hitters in that bunch. But yeah, it was a pretty insane race. I think we've come to expect the attrition and parity on these style tracks in the next-gen era. But this race in specific, it just felt more wild than anything else that we've seen. Between the strategies, between the new tires, which I don't think were as aggressive as we initially thought they were going to be, but there was definitely an element of uncertainty associated with that new tire that Goodyear brought to Watkins Glen. But with that in mind, Chris Buescher played spoiler alert, as a winner in the playoffs who did not make the round of 16, but it should not have come as a surprise to many people, seeing as he's been one of the best drivers, hands down, arguably the best driver, definitely the most consistent driver on the road courses in this next-gen era. And yeah, 3 runner-ups later, he's finally a winner in 2024. SVG, he out-dueled him on that final lap, and honestly, it was shades of 2012 for me, with Marcus Ambrose, Brad Keselowski, and Kyle Busch. Incredible finish, incredible final lap. Kudos to him. That was a well-earned, well-deserved win. And just rolling through this top 10 really quick, I think it's very much evidenced by this top 10 that this was very much a wild card race. But with that in mind, there were definitely a few names in here that we did not highlight specifically, but you could have expected them to run inside the top 10 given their pedigree on road courses. Mentioned that top 2 of Chris Buescher and SVG. The Spire cars, actually all 3 of them finished top 10 for the first time in the organization's history. Carson Hocevar, the highest scoring of those, in 3rd. You had Zane Smith, who we highlighted actually as a value pick, finishing 5th. He was a top 10 car the entire day. And what do you know? Corey LaJoie finished 8th in his first ever top 10 on a non-superspeedway track. Then 4th was my sleeper, Ross Chastain. You had 2 road course aces in Chase Briscoe in 6th, Michael McDowell in 7th. Surprise top 10 from Ryan Preece in 9th, and one of our value picks again, Austin Cindric in 10th. And I think this was a good race to kind of analyze going into Bristol, because in a very similar sense, we're going to kind of a wild card once again with this different tire at Bristol. We saw it on display in the spring, but there wasn't a whole lot of clarity from this race, because after about 35, 40 laps, these tires were popping left and right. Cars were surrendering to pit road. And, I mean, you want to go in here expecting the exact same thing. But at the same time, I feel like, we have these insane races. Then you go back to the track for a second time, and teams kind of know what to expect. I know they're putting down a PJ1 traction compound application in the grooves that may help with limiting the tire fall off and them being more expendable in this race. So there is maybe more of an element of, predictability in that sense. But all in all, it should be another pretty insane race here at Bristol in the night race. But with that in mind, I think there's definitely some drivers that are going to excel at this track like we've seen in the past. And yeah, it should be another really fun race. But I want to throw a little bit of a caution here before we go into the betting analysis for this show. Very similarly to Watkins Glen last week, I don't think this is a race where you want to throw the house on any specific bets, whether it be race winner, big money bets, DFS. I think, head-to-heads and the better, worse bets are where we're going to want to focus on this week, especially considering the fact that we were correct in our analysis last week in our over-under bets. So with that in mind, why don't we kick off the Take It to the Bank segment for the Bristol night race, baby?
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. Everything on the line. And before we get into the pre-qualifying odds, let's look at the playoff bubble, because you've got, as we mentioned, I think there was only one playoff driver that finished in the top 10 last week, so things are considerably shaken up after Watkins Glen. So who would have thought 2 races into the playoffs, Denny Hamlin is 6 points off the bubble. Then you've got Brad K, -12, Truex is -14, Harrison Burton is -20, And then you get up to above the bubble. +6 are Chase Briscoe and Ty Gibbs. William Byron +25. Kyle Larson +26. Blaney +29. And then you've got Reddick and Elliott +30. Daniel Suarez +36. And Alex Bowman +41 after a really strong run. I mean, this was a race that really shook up a lot. Back-to-back races that really shook up a lot. And so keep that in mind as well as we talk about pre-qualifying odds per BetMGM here. The favorite per Vegas is Denny Hamlin, +400. Kyle Larson, +75, +575. Christopher Bell is +600. He is the points leader at this point with regards to those who have not locked themselves into the playoffs. Then you've got Ty Gibbs at +800 and Brad Keselowski at +1,000. So Cole, Vegas seems to think that some of the drivers that need to have good runs are going to have good runs. And I guess that's how the saying goes. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. And as we kick it into our favorites category here, there are several drivers that we're going to mention that have to have a good run, and we believe they will.
Yes, Vegas is heavily favoring the Joe Gibbs Racing Toyotas, and that would be a very fair assessment going into this cutoff race. You mentioned it. The favorite there is Denny Hamlin, once again, +400 for the race win. And very surprisingly, a $17 million budget, which is the 13th most expensive per GridRival, so a really good value there. But why is Denny Hamlin the favorite? Denny Hamlin has won the last 2 races at Bristol, despite the unknowns and the mayhem of this past spring, with over 300 laps led and a 3.7 average, both series bests in the next-gen era. He is also a 4-time winner with almost 1,200 laps led, both second best in the series, and a 13.6 average, which is the third best overall. However, that's a very large sample size in 34 starts. So for all intents and purposes, Denny Hamlin, by far and away the favorite going into this one. However, let's take into account here, Denny Hamlin has not only back-to-back finishes outside the top 20, but you mentioned it, he's -6 in the standings for that fact, and he has a 20.2 average over his last 5 starts. So he has been in a massive dry spell at the worst point this season, maybe arguably in his career, being that it's the waning stages of his career. However, I do want to point out that Denny Hamlin is known for executing in these big situation moments. We saw it happen last year where he beat everybody's favorite driver. We've seen it so many times where this team has been able to overcome many adversities and propel their way into the championship four. I know it's been a very tough stretch for this 11 team, but I expect nothing less than the best from this 11 bunch going into Bristol, one of his best tracks. Denny Hamlin, he's the favorite for a reason. We got to go with the number 11 car for one of our favorites this weekend. Now, we're all very high on JGR for this weekend at Bristol, but I want to shift gears here to Hendrick Motorsports and Kyle Larson, who was again plus 575 for the race win. That is the second shortest odds for the win. And he's a pretty steep $18.6 million for GridRival for DFS. That is the fourth most expensive in the field. And very similarly to Denny Hamlin, one of the best drivers all season. I mean, he has series best marks and wins. He's been, for all intents and purposes, probably the best driver in the series this season. But he has finished outside the top 10 in both playoff starts with a 21.6 average over his last 5 races. So there's been a lot of talk about Denny Hamlin and how he has been in a dry spell the past few weeks, but Kyle Larson's in that very much the exact same vein. And it's going very under the radar, and he's been even worse in that sense with the 21.6 average finish. So I think that's more so speaking on his inconsistencies. He's, again, a driver that's very volatile in the sense that he's been able to kind of go for broke in some of these races, but, it's crunch time. It's the playoffs. So with that in mind, I think what we've seen from Kyle Larson is that even when he has these dry spells and the inconsistencies, he's very much due for a breakout and to kind of level out and get a quality finish. And I think you look at Bristol as a place where he's in line to do that. He's finished top 5 in his last 4 Bristol starts. That includes a win and a runner-up finish. He also has laps led over his last 6 starts here with a 3.8 average. So again, very much in the same exact vein as Denny Hamlin, but with an even larger sample size. 6 races there, 3.8 average, really, really good. And in his career, he has an 11.6 average in 16 starts, which is tied for the series best at Bristol. So Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, heavy favorites going into this one, both kind of in their ruts at this point in the season, but I think it's a big race. It's going to be a big moment for all these teams, all these playoff drivers, and you're looking at two of the best in the business to go out there and get it done at Bristol on Saturday night.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of pressure on those two guys. I don't think you're going to see either of them outside the top five the entire night, to be honest with you. And listen, I think if we went into the playoffs and you asked every driver in the garage to predict the championship four, I think they would have included those two drivers. So the fact that they're both not guaranteed by any stretch to be in the round of 12 definitely speaks volumes about the unpredictability of what we've seen over the last couple weeks in the playoffs. But I think that they're going to bring, like you said, their best stuff, and they're going to rise to the occasion because those are two championship caliber teams, and they quite simply have to. I want to keep it in the Joe Gibbs Racing stable, though, Cole. I'll start with Ty Gibbs. You want the good news or the bad news on Ty Gibbs?
Let's go to the bad news first.
The bad news is his last three finishes have been 17th or worse. That's why he's only 6 up in the standings. The good news is the numbers at Bristol. He had a career-best 5th place finish here in 2022, 9th last year, and he's led over 100 laps over his last 2 starts. And he's plus 800 for the win, which is obviously well inside the top 5 in odds. 16.2 mil in the GridRival Daily Fantasy, which is the 16th most expensive driver. Very good value for Ty Gibbs. And listen, I've been very vocal about the fact that I think Ty Gibbs is going to win a race at some point this year. I've said it since before the green flag on the Daytona 500. I still think it's going to happen, and I think he's going to clinch his way into the playoffs, the next round of the playoffs, at some point in the next several weeks by winning a race. And I think this presents a really good opportunity to do that because, listen, he's had the 3 straight finishes outside the top 17, but I mean, there's been a lot of guys who have run into trouble the last 2 weeks. That's been very well documented. And I think that Ty Gibbs is one that you look at the numbers at Bristol and you look at a guy that's just so well composed for his age. I think he's going to be poised for a really good run this week. But the guy that's been the most consistent over the stretch of calamity for the other drivers in the playoff field has been Christopher Bell. And he is the most expensive driver in daily fantasy on GridRival at $20.9 million. Plus 600 for the race win, which is just inside the top 5. And he finished 14th at Watkins Glen, which you would normally think is a terrible result, but that was one of the best finishes of any playoff driver. So he actually gained a lot of points by finishing 14th last week. And prior to that, he had 3 straight top 5s. And we were saying it the last 2 weeks. This is a team and a driver that has this time of year down to a science. They know how to lock in, they know how to clutch up, and they've shown it. Look at what we just said about Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin. Those are 2 championship caliber teams that have not done it, and then the 20 team has done it, and that's why they're plus 46 to the good, which is not a lock, but look at all the drivers between him and the rest of the pack to the back of the pack. So I think that you're going to see a team that probably is going to play it pretty conservatively this week. So I'm not picking Christopher Bell for the win. He has finished top 10 with laps led in all 3 next-gen starts at Bristol, and he's had the most laps led over that span with over 350. So he's been one of the best drivers in the garage for one of the best teams, JGR, in the garage at Bristol. I just think that considering, where he is in the point standings, we're not going to see Christopher Bell go out and win the race because there's going to be a lot more desperate teams. But I think it's going to be a very, very good points day. Top 5 all day. Same deal as the guys I just mentioned with Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson. I think that it's going to be an extremely strong run for the entire Joe Gibbs Racing stable, but namely those 2 guys, Ty Gibbs and Christopher Bell.
Yeah, I think there's no question in my mind. If you're going for race winner bets, you got to look at that JGR camp. Mentioned 3 of the 4 drivers right there. And you mentioned the kind of the playing conservative aspect for Christopher Bell. Being 46 points to the good, if he's able to get, probably a top 5 in the first stage, he's pretty much locked into the next round. So I think at that point, that's where you can kind of place more money on Christopher Bell, maybe place a live bet for him to get the race win, because, you saw it with Joey Logano last week. They're already locked into that next round. They were able to get more aggressive with their strategies, more aggressive with their racecraft, and they were firmly in position for the win. So I think in a very similar sense, given Christopher Bell's stats as of late, his pedigree in the playoffs, and the potential to be locked into the next round early in this race, he is very much going to be a great pick for the win in this one. But the rule of thumb here is going to be if you're placing any race winner bets, it's got to be from that JGR stable. And I want to say one more thing on that. We are not going to mention MTJ on this show For that reason, we mentioned it weeks ago. I think it was for, it was one of the short track races, and we were saying, I think it was Richmond. If MTJ is not performing this race, we are not going to mention him the entire show until he proves us otherwise. And he has not proven otherwise since that race. He has been, in fact, probably one of the worst drivers in the field. He has failed to finish races. He's had rotten luck. And on top of that, his stats at Bristol are absolutely abysmal. He has 4 top 10s throughout his entire career at this track. Insane. However, he did finish top 10 in this race earlier this year. And he also has all those top 10s within the last, I want to say 8 years. So they've come recently, but very sporadically. And, it's going to be a big moment for this team, being that it's his final full-time season, his last chance to get a second championship. But I have no optimism in that 19 team, unfortunately, for this weekend. So if you're going to go with a Gibbs car, go with Bell, Gibbs, or Hamlin. And I also like Kyle Larson quite a bit for this weekend as a big moment driver and as somebody who is due for a big race given his recent stretch of luck.
Let's dive into sleepers here, Cole. I'll kick this one off because it's kind of weird to call the guy who won last week a sleeper, but, he's only won one race this year, and it was last week. That's Chris Buescher. That's a team that, to be honest with you, probably should have been in the playoffs. They're plus 1,500 for the win at Bristol, and $18.5 million in GridRival Daily Fantasy, which is the 5th most expensive driver. He can definitely play spoiler again. Look, he won the first next-gen race at Bristol a couple years ago, and he's finished top 10 with laps led in all 3 starts at this race the last 3 years. He has a 4.0 average finish over that time, tied for the second best in the sport, and he finished 7th here in the spring. So this was not a one-and-done for Chris Buescher. Remember how hot he was at this time last year? It wasn't just a flash in the pan. He's good at all the tracks at this point in the circuit. That includes the road course like Watkins Glen, and it definitely includes Bristol. So Chris Buescher is a guy that I 1,000% think can play spoiler again. I mentioned there's a lot of desperate drivers out there. I don't know if I would call Chris Buescher desperate, but they've got nothing to lose. They can go out there and try to win every single race left, and that's exactly what they're going to do. Another guy, Cole, that can play it a very high-risk game is the one and only driver that's locked into the round of 12, and that was the race winner from 2 weeks ago, Joey Logano, plus 2,000 for the win this week, $18.2 million in DFS, which is the 7th most expensive on GridRival. He has had a really, really rough stretch at Bristol. Looking at the numbers, his best finish here in the next-gen car has been 22nd, which was this year. He has an average finish barely inside the top 30 over this next-gen era, and 7 straight finishes outside the top 10. Now, that's the bad news. The good news, a 2-time winner here. He won the playoff opener, finished top 15 at Watkins Glen, which once again was one of the best playoff results of any driver. He had a chance at the win, and he has had an 8th place average finish over his last 3 starts. So you get a guy that, if the race comes down to strategy or something, they can definitely go for broke. It's a risky pick based on what I just mentioned, but it's one with Joey Logano where he's proven he can do it here before. He has been, you talk about drivers and teams that channel that energy, that playoff energy at the right time. Joey Logano clutches up every single year and gets it done. So, he's going to be a name that, based on prior numbers, a lot of people aren't going to look at. It's not a sexy pick because he's already locked into the round of 12, but that gives them every reason to go out there and run up front and go for broke to get this win. I think that they're going to continue establishing themselves as a team that a lot of in the garage I think can be in the championship for, because as those Titans have stumbled, the teams like the 5 and the 11, the 22 and the 20 have really capitalized, and I think they want to keep riding some momentum into the round of 12. So I think that Joey Logano is a sneaky pick for this week.
I couldn't agree more. I think those are both excellent picks in Chris Buescher and Joey Logano. I've been singing Logano's praises for about a month plus now. You just seen the signs. They've been much more competitive on track. They've been getting the results. They've been getting the wins. And, playoff time's Joey Logano time. So I do believe, despite those numbers at Bristol recently and over his last 7 starts, he should be due for a really quality day at Bristol. Now, we're going very Ford heavy in the sleepers category. So I'm going to go with Brad Keselowski. So we're going to go with both RFK cars in this section. BK is the 5th shortest odds for the win at plus 1,000. He is the 8th most expensive driver per GridRival for DFS at $17.8 million. And the thing with BK is, he was been one of the more consistent Ford drivers this season. However, he has not been that as of late. He has 3 straight finishes of 14th or worse, and a 26th place finish at Watkins Glen, which, I'll be honest, given all of the adversity he had to go through in this race, that is a blessing in disguise for me. But despite all that, he's still 12 points out of the round of 12 going into this race. But that's not the worst thing going into Bristol, because he is a 3-time winner here, most recently in 2020. And he has an 8th place average in the next-gen era. But I want to focus on that average here really quick. That is brought down by a worst finish of 13th in the 2022 race. He led over 100 laps in that race, with Chris Buescher winning that one. But he finished 3rd here in the spring in that race of attrition with those new tires. So BK is someone who's been able to always get it done here at Bristol. He has a very good grasp on this track. I think even with the unknowns of the new tires, he's proven that he can get it done with that 3rd place finish here earlier this year. And he's just a very well-composed driver in the playoffs. I think he's very self-aware that, he's in the later stages of his career as well, kind of similarly to guys like Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., and he's going to be hell-bent on getting a quality result to advance into this next round. I think BK is going to be an awesome pick. And then my next driver I'm going to go with for a sleeper, heavy sleeper at that, is going to be Chase Elliott at plus 2,000 and $18.4 million for DFS per GridRival. That is the 6th most expensive at that. And Mr. Consistent has not been quite that as of late. Only 1 top 10 over his last 5 starts. However, his 17.8 average in that 5-race stretch is good enough for him to be 30 points to the good in the playoff standings. And for that, I think he's going to be a really sneaky pick for this race win. Why do I say that? Because he is the other driver tied for the series best average at Bristol at 11.6 with Kyle Larson in 14 starts, so a really good sample size there. And in the next-gen era, he's finished top 10 in all 3 of those starts. That includes a runner-up and a 5.7 average finish, tied for the 3rd best in the series in the next-gen. So I know Chase Elliott has had a very silent season to this point, very silent resume at Bristol in the next-gen era, but he has been right there on the heels of these top dogs like Denny Hamlin. I mean, that 5.7 average is no joke in this car. To finish top 10 in all 3 next-gen starts, borderline top 5 at that, is really, really impressive. That runner-up also speaks volumes, and I expect this team to, be a strong contender for this win. Definitely a top 5 car, and I think of these 4 sleepers, he has the best shot at going to victory lane, even with that those odds of plus 2,000, which is the longest in this category, tied with Joey Logano. So do not sleep on Chase Elliott for this race win.
Yeah, this week, I feel like this is a race that's going to be won by a former champion. I really feel that you're going to see a team and a driver that has a good feel for how to navigate this time of year, good composure this time of year. I think that you're going to see a Chase Elliott type driver win this race just because, listen, there's a lot of drivers in trouble right now, and one of them is going to have to clutch up. It's going to have to be a former champion. I think that it's going to take that kind of experience to win this race. As we look at value picks, though, Cole, we're not going to pick any former champions here. These are the best values per the GridRival odds and budgeting in terms of daily fantasy. And I want to talk about a guy. Listen, we've talked a little bit about Stewart-Haas Racing. I think that you're looking at some short track ringers here. You're going to talk about Josh Berry in a second, who I like a lot this week. I'm going to talk about his teammate because the clock's ticking on another potential win for SHR. We got the one out of the way with Chase Briscoe, who I think is a really good value pick this week. $14.4 million, 22nd most expensive driver on GridRival this week. I mentioned before, he was the highest placing playoff driver at Watkins Glen. The fact that he is 6 points to the good when a lot of people were writing him off in the round of 16 entering Bristol, it speaks a lot about that team and the momentum that they were able to carry into the playoffs from that win. And I think that this is a track that definitely caters to Chase Briscoe's driving style. He may not have any top 10s in his career at Bristol, but that's why this is a value pick. He did match a career best here in the spring. He finished 13th and over 4 starts here in the next gen. 16.8 average finish. So you're looking at a hot driver in Chase Briscoe and one that knows how to get around short tracks, won his way into the playoffs. And I think, listen, for me, you can believe what you want. I think momentum is a very real thing. And I think Chase Briscoe has it right now. So I'm definitely picking him for Based on that value, I'm looking at him as a value pick this week. Another guy from the same stable that you think of when you go to short tracks is Ryan Preece, $13.7 million in the budgeting for GridRival, which is just in front of Chase Briscoe, 21st. He has finishes of 12th and 14th, including in the spring in the next gen at Bristol, including a top 10 back in 2020, a 15.3 average finish in 7 starts, which is well above his career average, which shows you that Bristol is one of Ryan Preece's best tracks. And he too is coming off a top 10 at Watkins Glen. So piggybacking off the fact that I think that SHR has had very sporty speed the last several weeks, I think Bristol is a track that caters to these two drivers, and I like where they're at in terms of value outside the top 20. They are two that I'm definitely looking at to fill out my fantasy lineups this week on GridRival.
I love both those picks. And keeping in the SHR camp, you alluded to this driver, Josh Berry, one of our short track aces in the field. And you want to talk about values. Josh Berry is an absolutely incredible value in GridRival this week. He is only $10.5 million. That is the second cheapest driver in the field. For someone who finished 12th here in the spring with laps led, for someone who's finished top 15 on 6 short tracks this season with 2 top 10s, that is a smoking value. If you're doing any sort of DFS this week, I am going all the way to the bottom of the GridRival app. I am putting Josh Berry in my lineup, and he is a lock all day. Even I would consider him for the race win as well. He's plus 3,500 for the race win. You mentioned it in your analysis with those two drivers and Ryan Preece and Chase Briscoe. The clock is ticking. We only have 8 races to go in the 2024 season for this team. I expect Josh Berry to be a really strong contender in this race. I expect a top 10 day from this team at a minimum. So Josh Berry should be a lock for all lineups for all intents and purposes. And I want to round this thing out with another Ford driver. So 4 Ford drivers for value picks. Go with Michael McDowell at $13.2 million. That is the 23rd most expensive in the field per GridRival. He's coming off a top 10 at Watkins Glen with laps led in 3 of his last 4 starts. So he has had a lot of speed here as of late. I love what I've seen from this team at Bristol last year. He finished a career best 6th in this race with a top 3 car. I think that's going very overlooked due to the, I guess, inconsistencies and the shortcomings he's had in 2024, but you cannot forget that performance he had last year. You know, I was in attendance there. I got a first-hand seat at this driver and this team, what they did. They really have a good grasp on Bristol, and that's evidenced by his stats in the next gen, which is a 9.3 average, 5th best in the field at that. On top of that 6th place finish, he has 2 11th place finishes, so knocking on the door of a top 10 car overall, this track in the next gen. Given his speed, given, the waning stages of his career at FRM, I think that Michael McDowell is going to be a really good value pick for this weekend at Bristol.
I love both those picks, especially Josh Berry. I think you said what needed to be said. I don't know how you could possibly consider not picking him for your lineup because you're going to save so much and be able to afford basically any driver you want, which is what we'll get to in a second. But that's a dozen drivers, Cole. Let's get it down to 6. I'll take Christopher Bell from the favorites category. I will go with Chris Buescher out of the sleepers category, and I'll take Chase Briscoe out of the values.
Sweet. Yeah, for the favorites, it's a little tough for me because I really do believe that Kyle Larson's going to have a top 5 day, and I do not like picking drivers to repeat, three-peat at that if you're Denny Hamlin, but I think I would be foolish not to pick Denny Hamlin as the favorite for this win, given his 3.7 average and those back-to-back wins. For my sleeper, going to go with BK. I know I sang the praises of Chase Elliott, but I think Brad Keselowski is somebody who's proven time and time again as somebody that can perform in those big situation moments and someone who's been able to perform at Bristol at that. So we'll go with BK for a sleeper, and then I got to go with Josh Berry for my value pick this weekend. 10.5 mil, second least expensive in the field. That is just downright disrespectful at this point for Bristol.
Yeah, it's just what we call a no-brainer. And on that note, as we look at big money bets this week, Cole, some no-brainers. These are our favorite prop bets of the week where you can feel comfortable throwing a good chunk of change on top 5s, top 10s, some head-to-heads, which we'll get to. Josh Berry, plus 125 for a top 10. Really not bad. But there's a lot of value to be had this week, I feel, with the top 5 bets.
Yes, I'm a big fan of a few of these. I do like Ty Gibbs to finish top 5 at plus 110 quite a bit. I also am a huge fan of the Chris Buescher top 5 prop at plus 250. for somebody who has a fourth place average here in the next gen, for somebody who's coming off a race win at Watkins Glen, and as you said, momentum is very much palpable going into these playoff races. I really do like that one quite a bit. And of course, I want to echo the Josh Berry top 10 prop at plus 130. That one's almost a no-brainer to me for someone who is a short track ace and for someone who led laps here in the spring and probably should have had a better finish than 12th place. So those are my three that I would call my favorite big money bets. Buescher, Gibbs top 5, Berry top 10.
The only other one I'll throw in, and I don't know if I'd call it a lock because you talked about the inconsistency this week, the past several weeks, is Chase Elliott, plus 225 for a top 5. It just feels like too good a value for somebody that we've seen be a champion, run well here, and he's been one of the best drivers in the garage all year, but the inconsistencies noted the last few weeks. So I wouldn't call it a big money bet, but that's one that I definitely am monitoring as I look at the practice and qualifying speeds. But Cole, we've got some more unfinished business, different kinds of bets. Let's talk about better or worse. These are from our friends at GridRival. It's kind of like an over-under, but it can get confusing if you talk about over-under 5.5 in terms of where you finish. So better or worse, give me your favorite better or worse bets this week per GridRival and what they have to offer.
Awesome. Yeah, so I've been very vocal about my confidence in Kyle Larson. I do think he will have a top 5 day, and for that, I'm going to go Kyle Larson better than 5.5, so a top 5 for Kyle Larson. Again, very, very high on Ty Gibbs. I think he's due for a top 5 day as well. For that, we're going to go better than 6.5, so 6 places are better for Ty Gibbs. And we're going to go with our first worse of this segment, Tyler Reddick, worse than 11.5, and why I'm going to go with that for one of the hottest drivers in the series entering the playoffs is because Tyler Reddick has an average finish just inside the top 20 at Bristol. He only has one top 10 back in 2020, and he has not finished better than 15th in the next gen at Bristol. It's just been a track where he's struggled to get around, and I think he has enough of a points cushion to where he can kind of play conservatively. So for that, I do not see Tyler Reddick finishing inside the top 11 in this race. And then we also both mentioned the confidence in Chase Elliott. He has a really good, better, worse position here, 10.5. So we're going to go with Chase Elliott to finish top 10 in this race. That's a great value. So if you parlay all those 4 drivers, Kyle Larson, Ty Gibbs, Chase Elliott as better for their positions, Tyler Reddick as worse for his position. I did $10 for the full throttle bets for this proposal, only because again, just the unknowns with this tire and the obviously mayhem that's likely to ensue with the playoff cutoff race. Not as confident in the finishing positions. So $10 buy-in for this full throttle. You get a $150 payout. If you throw the safety car insurance feature on there and get all 4 of those drivers correct, you get $75 as a payout. And if you only miss one leg in that 4-driver parlay, it's a payout of $22.50. So you're still coming ahead $12.50 to the good with that safety car feature and one leg missing from that parlay. How do you feel about those 4 drivers, Steven?
I like that a lot. I mean, especially with the safety car insurance feature, but I like the idea, like you convinced me on Tyler Reddick. He barely has finished inside the top 20 in his career at Bristol. I like Kyle Larson a lot this week. Ty Gibbs, I mean, we've sung their praises all episode long, and I would be hard-pressed to find Chase Elliott not finishing in the top 10. So I think that if you're looking at 4 drivers to maximize value, I feel really good about that.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Even given the uncertainties going into this one, whether it be the tires or the pressures of the playoff cutoff race, I do feel good about those 4 drivers and the better, worse props.
Let's talk head-to-head driver matchups as well, Cole, because you can also parlay these on GridRival. And same deal. You can add the safety car if you want to have some insurance if you miss one by some chance or another. But you've got Alex Bowman against Noah Gragson. We've got Kyle Busch versus Chris Buescher. And we've got Tyler Reddick versus Chase Briscoe. So I think those are 3 situations there where we've got some pretty obvious choices. And the thing to keep in mind, too, is that these are including a positional buffer. So for somebody to finish, in the case of Alex Bowman, he would have to finish minus 4.5 ahead of Noah Gragson, so at least 5 positions ahead of him. Or in the case of Chris Buescher, he would have to finish at least 4 ahead of Kyle Busch. So I think looking at those three, I feel like there's a pretty clear parlay that we can go with there.
Yeah, and just again, GridRival has seemingly infinite amounts of head-to-head parlays, over/under bets, or better worse bets, I should say. But these are the three that I pinpointed as the best ones for this weekend. And again, I want to go back to what I said earlier in the show at the very beginning. We cleaned house in this segment last week for a very unpredictable race. We got all three head-to-head matchups correct with a plus 500 payout. That is a really, really good number, and there's a lot of ways you can make some money with these head-to-head matchups. But the three that we pinpointed this week were, again, Bowman versus Gregson, Buescher versus Busch, and Briscoe versus Reddick. The obvious answer for me, there's obvious answers for all three of these matchups. The first one is Bowman over Gregson by 5 positions. Alex Bowman has been shockingly, arguably the best driver in the playoffs to this point. He is, well inside that top 12 in points. He has scored the most stage points of all drivers in these first 2 races. And he finished third in this race in the spring. Noah Gragson, he had some nice flashes this season, but going up against a playoff driver, someone who's been arguably the best in the playoffs, it's a no-brainer for me. Chris Buescher, last week's winner, up against Kyle Busch, who's had a very struggle-filled season. And for someone who has some of the best numbers at this track in the next gen, for Buescher to finish ahead of Busch by 4 positions, that is also, again, a no-brainer for me. And then we also mentioned Reddick's struggles in the next-gen era and in his career at Bristol, as well as Briscoe's consistency at Bristol in his career. This one also, I think it's going to be a bit tighter, but it also is one that's going to be a pretty easy answer for me in Briscoe over Reddick. But Reddick is favored over Briscoe, so you can have Briscoe finish within 3 positions of Tyler Reddick for this positional parlay. So I love that one, and Chase Briscoe over Tyler Reddick with a 3 positional buffer. Feeling much more confident in this head-to-head parlayable matchups as opposed to the better worse parlays. Just seeing as how we did last week and the nature of these specific matchups. So went with the $20 buy-in for the full throttle feature. That'll get you $120 back. If you throw on the safety car feature and get all 3 of those matchups correct, it's a $40 payout, so you're doubling your money. And if you only miss 1 leg in that parlay, you're getting your money back at $20. So again, feel very confident in the head-to-head parlayable matchups this week in Bowman over Gregson, Buescher over Busch, and Briscoe over Tyler Reddick.
There is a lot of money to be made with some of these prop bets and parlays this week because I agree with you. I like the head-to-head better there. There's some pretty obvious answers, but I also like the over-unders a lot too. So this is a week where I'm looking at every kind of bet, the over-unders, the parlays. I'm looking at our big money bets. There's some really good value in the top 5s, top 10s, and race winners too. I feel like this is a week where race winners almost kind of take a back seat. But I think there's also money to be made, Cole, in the daily fantasy spectrum of things. Because looking at the GridRival budget that we've talked about, there's a few drivers that I feel like are way too low in terms of their budget. That when I looked at my lineup, the one I created, and compared it to the one that you created, very, very similar. So let's dissect what a good DFS lineup this week looks like, noting the fact that we want to, of course, look at where every driver starts for the all-important outcome of place differential points. But I think that looking at you said it before, open up the app, hit Josh Berry, who's only worth $10.5 million, which is a very small amount of your budget on GridRival. Starting there, and then also moving on to Ty Gibbs at $16.2 million. Really good way to open up your lineup. And then in terms of 2 aces, I like the idea of Kyle Larson and Chris Buescher a lot. They're the 4th and 5th most expensive drivers. And then from there, you basically have options of any 2 drivers remaining, and especially any 2 between Chris Buescher and Ty Gibbs. So any of those middle-of-the-pack, really good drivers that we mentioned, there's a lot of different ways you can compose your lineup. But I think we both agree that we like the idea of rounding out the lineup with a set of veterans and former winners at this track for a very long time.
Yeah, so our lineup's already looking really strong with Ty Gibbs and Josh Berry as our anchors, Kyle Larson and Chris Buescher as our top dogs, and the fact we were able to fit Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin as our middlemen, if you will, is pretty insane to think about. So Chase Elliott, $18.4 million once again. Denny Hamlin, $17 million flat for this weekend. These were almost a no-brainer in my opinion. I mean, Chase Elliott, he's got the top 5. He's got the runner-up in the next gen at Bristol. Been one of the best cars by far and away. Got the series best average time, but Kyle Larson at 11.6 in his career. Denny Hamlin's got that back-to-back wins going into this one. 3.7 average in the next gen. Pretty much no-brainer in my opinion. The only struggle I had was kind of picking between Chase Elliott and Brad Keselowski. You could definitely make the case that they're two very similar drivers going into this one. Brad Keselowski with much more to lose, being that he's 12 below the cutoff going into this race. But, I think you're looking between those 3 drivers for the middle of your lineup. Brad Keselowski, Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, and you could also get kind of creative with drivers like Joey Logano. You can go sacrifice some more money for, lesser names like Michael McDowell or Ryan Preece or Chase Briscoe. But I think for all intents and purposes, this is a very well-rounded lineup, and I would be very surprised if all 6 of these drivers did not finish top 10 or very close to top 10.
Yeah, and you could very easily, if you didn't like Denny Hamlin because of the recent struggles or Chase Elliott for the same reason, you could very easily choose somebody like Joey Logano or Brad Keselowski, and you would still have that same amount of budget to work with. You could even go with Christopher Bell and compensate on the back end and choose somebody that's a little bit on the less expensive side, like a Ryan Blaney, if you happen to like him this week. But there's a lot of options, safe to say, especially when you lead your lineup off with those great values of Josh Berry, Ty Gibbs, and you could even look at some of those other guys we mentioned, like Ryan Preece as a really good value this week, or Chase Briscoe to include in that DFS lineup. But again, obviously don't want to lock any of that in until we have starting positions and we see what these cars look like on the track. But definitely feel good about where we're at before the cars hit the track with that lineup.
I wanted to add one more thing, actually. So you mentioned it at the end of the head-to-head parlayable matchups section, how you are also quite a big fan of some of the better worse bets. So GridRival, I forgot to mention this, they have a really, really awesome feature where you can actually parlay head-to-head matchups and the better worse positional finishes. So if you were to feel good about maybe 2 parlayable matchups like Bowman over Gregson, Buescher over Busch, but you also were a huge fan of Elliott to finish better than 10.5, you can parlay those. You can parlay as many as you want. I think it's up to 8 total. So you could parlay potentially 4 head-to-heads, 4 better worse matchups, and that's a great feature in my opinion. It's very unique. That's not something you can do on other betting apps like BetMGM or FanDuel or DraftKings. So, we haven't dug into some of those specific parlays between those 2 categories, but I think going forward, that's something we can look at as maybe an ultra lock for parlaying head-to-heads and better worse finishes. But I did want to throw that out there because you made a really good point there in saying there were some good better worse matchups in addition to the head-to-heads. So really, really awesome feature that GridRival has for motorsports bettors.
Yeah, the amount of flexibility that this app gives you to do literally whatever you want, whatever caters to what you think is going to win you some money, I think is huge. And I think that's something we definitely will pay attention to in the weeks coming forward. It's hard to believe there's only 7 races left after this, but we're still getting our bearings with GridRival, and it's been really cool to see an app that is completely catered toward motorsports, and especially in terms of this podcast, NASCAR. So it's been fun to look at that and look at all the different ways that you can make money by betting on NASCAR. So let's put our money where our mouth is here, Cole. Let's talk race winners and our dark horse picks for the week. I picked first last week. My selection was Chase Elliott. Your pick for the win was Ty Gibbs, but your pick for a sleeper was Ross Chastain, who almost won the race. Now, you got first pick at race winner this week. I'll get first pick at sleeper. What do you got?
Yeah, I know I picked Denny Hamlin as my favorite from my 3 drivers from each category, but I have a really good feeling about Kyle Larson this weekend. I just think that, they've had their inconsistencies, they've had their volatility, but this team always finds a way to equal it out and, execute when it matters the most. This is a driver, once again, I know it's fallen under the radar due to Denny Hamlin's dominance, but he's finished top 5 in all 3 next-gen starts at Bristol. He has a runner-up finish here in the next-gen. I think he's going to best that and finish with a win here at Bristol on Saturday night.
Yeah, I feel great about Kyle Larson. He would have been my pick to win if you didn't take him, and since we can't take the same driver, I was vocal about the fact I think it's going to be a former champion that wins this race. And I think that champion will be Brad Keselowski. I think that he's a guy that, listen, there's a reason why he's in the top 5 in odds for Vegas, plus 1,000. I think he has a really good chance to win this race. And listen, after the win for Chris Buescher last week, winning is contagious. When you have a win and under the RFK stable, Brad K wants to do the same, and he wants to lock himself into the round of 12. And we've seen so much unpredictability these last couple of weeks in the round of 16. For Brad being 12 points back, it's definitely it's a mountain he can climb with using points, especially at a track like Bristol and the trouble that could amount itself for other drivers ahead of him. But you can lock yourself in by winning this race. And for all the reasons we mentioned before, Brad is a great pick for this week. I really feel that it's going to be a former champion that wins this race. Look, 3-time winner at this track, winner in the stable last week at Watkins Glen. I think we're going to see RFK sweep the final 2 races of the round of 16, and I think that Brad Keselowski is going to be a really good pick for the win this week. And for a sleeper, very easy pick, 16th driver in odds, because we can't pick inside the top 15, is Josh Berry. So I'm going to take Josh Berry. It's criminal that he is outside the top 15 in odds this week at plus 3,500 for the win. We talked about his prop bets as well, but very easy selection for my sleeper this week.
Yeah, that is a no-brainer for sure. And I know I mentioned earlier in the show, we don't want to go betting the house on race winner bets, but you look at his odds again, plus 3,500 for the race win. That's one where you could throw $5 on there and still walk away with $180. So that's one that I would definitely entertain. Josh Berry should have a very strong race at Bristol. For my sleeper, I'm going to go with Alex Bowman. I know we didn't highlight him specifically, but I mentioned him briefly during the head-to-head parlayable matchups. I think we would be irresponsible to not mention him or highlight him at some capacity. He's plus 4,000 for the race win. He finished 3rd in this race earlier this year. So I think for someone who's been arguably the best in the playoffs in the round of 16, I have to go with Alex Bowman as a potential dark horse for this win. Again, he's scored the most stage points of all playoff drivers. He finished 3rd in this race earlier this year. So I like Alex Bowman quite a bit as a dark horse for the win.
I do too. I mean, listen, like you said, we didn't highlight him, but momentum is a very real thing, especially this time of year, especially for a driver that's in the playoffs and one that is as well locked into the playoffs at plus 41 as he is. So this will be a fun one, Cole. It is the best Pro Shops night race, Saturday night, 7:35 Eastern time. All the things you love about racing, an elimination race, under the lights, at Bristol. I think we've seen, under the next-gen era that the short track racing hasn't been the most competitive, but we've seen signs that it's getting better over the last several tracks that we've been to, including the 1-mile ovals. And you mentioned the PJ1. I think that there's going to be some other factors that will make this an entertaining race. And I feel like it's weird to say this, but after the weeks we had to open up the playoffs at Atlanta and Watkins Glen, this to me feels like a race that's going to be a little bit more predictable. And I feel weird saying that for an elimination race at Bristol, but just based on what we've seen out of the short tracks this year and in the next-gen era and everything we've discussed and what we've seen the last 2 weeks at the road course and the super speedway, I feel like this short track, believe it or not, oddly enough, in an elimination race, I feel like things are going to go a certain way, and it's going to be the way we predict them to go.
No, I definitely agree. And I kind of touched on that earlier in the show after we dissected Watkins Glen, only because, even given the tire they brought here earlier in the spring, they're still coming back here for a second time. I feel like no matter what, whenever they're racing under the lights, for whatever reason, the racing is just not, I don't want to say compelling, but it's just more predictable. There's not a whole lot of calamity that transpires. Maybe it's the cooler temperatures. I think the PJ1 traction compound will definitely aid in making these tires live a bit longer. So, yeah, while it may seem like more of a wild card given what we saw in the spring, I do truly believe that it's going to be more predictable than what we saw here in years past, and especially in this round of 16. So I definitely will take quite a bit of stock into what we've said in this episode. But again, just given the potential for the uncertainty, I would hold off on placing any big bets until we see what happens in the practice session on Friday, because you get a better idea for how these tires how long the tires can last, how the traction compound impacts the tires as well, and of course, who is going to look best in this race at Bristol with the speeds and all that transpire from qualifying and practice. So, no, I definitely agree. And one more thing I want to say before we sign off here, Mountain Dew is back, baby. Daniel Hemrick is rocking an awesome Mountain Dew sponsored car this weekend. 1,000% a dime in my book. Potential silver dollar award contender for the end of the season for the money stop here in our nickel and dime segment. So check it out. We'll have our graphic out here very shortly. But yeah, I think we're due for an awesome race here at Bristol, as we always are. Under the lights, let's get it done. Should be fun.
I'll give you a dime, too, to end. How about that 88 car in the Xfinity Series, the Hellman's car? Blue and yellow, 88, Dale Jr. Love to see it. That is, first of all, awesome to see, but that paint scheme's awesome. So we love our paint schemes here on the Money Stop, and you can find them at @_Money Stop on social media. We took it out of the actual episodes to make a little bit more time to make you money with talking about various different kinds of prop bets, but it's still on social media. We love our paint schemes, and we've got a couple dimes for sure hitting the track this week. That being said, Cole, let's drop the jack on the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. Same way any good money stop ends. That'll be it as we go to the Bristol night race round of 16 eliminator. This is going to be so fun to watch, Cole, and I cannot wait this Saturday night. That'll do it this week on the Money Stop. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Cole, I'm Steven. Again, follow along at @_Money Stop, and please let us know what you think. If you want to hear about certain specific bets or drivers, props, let us know going forward. We'll work it into the episodes. But 7 weeks left after this. Let's see who gets into the round of 12. We'll see you next week. Gotta make 'em wanna come back for more.